This is House Planning Help episode 155. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is self-builder Jeremy Harris. If you haven't heard part one, that's episode 154, just before this, and it probably makes sense to listen to that first. This is part two, where we continue on the conversation. We've found out about how he got the land in this rural community. Now we go through the build, and what's particularly interesting in this case is he didn't use an architect or designer. He did it himself. So what does it mean? What were the ramifications, if any? We'll get to that in just a few moments. Before we do, I wanted to tell you about our free resource that we've been working on quite hard over the last couple of months, the Eco Design 101 e-course. So this is a 10-part e-course, and it takes you through the fundamentals of what makes an eco home. It includes key lessons from our various experts that we've spoken to and fellow self-builders who've been there and done it. Plus, I share a few videos as well, and we just try and make it as concise as possible. We don't want you wasting your time, just make it really short and simple, hopefully get you to understand the key lessons. houseplanninghelp.com/tips to find a few more details. So let's move on to our interview with Jeremy Harris. Today is all about the build, and Jeremy has done a lot of this himself. First up, therefore, I wondered how much practical experience he had going into this.
Just what I guess a competent DIYer would be as far as I went. I'd put up a few shelves, repaired heating systems and done an odd bit of plumbing, done an odd bit of electrical wiring and added an extra socket here and there. I had never done a building. I'd never laid a brick or done any work of that sort of nature at all. So I had no experience of hiring tradesmen or, employing builders. And that really was my biggest worry when I started. Is why I started out with I mentioned in the previous episode that I had a project manager who found a problem with the site. My reason for initially saying I'd have a project manager was because I didn't have the confidence to manage something so big. During the year that we were buying the plot, I gained that confidence, and going through the planning process, not using an architect, having to design the house myself, get familiar with building regulations, I thought if you've gone that far, you've done the architect's job, you've done the building regulations job, you've done the planning consultant's job. It can't be very difficult to actually manage the build. That's got to be fairly easy. But even then, I placed a firm price contract for the groundworks here. We had to initially remove about 900 tons of soil to get the site level, to dig it out of the hillside, build a 3-metre high retaining wall that's around about, nearly a metre thick at the base to hold the ground back. And because of the need to make sure the levels were all right and the drainage systems were all put in okay and everything else, I got a groundworks contractor in to do all of that work. It was about £50,000, £55,000. And I had him on a firm price contract. I gave him a set of drawings and a specification and gave him complete control of the site. So I didn't need a project manager because he was project managing the job. The site belonged to him. Site security was his responsibility. I was a guest on the site during that time. He did everything to my spec, but that was all agreed before the contract. So at the end of that was a 7-week job. At the end of that, we had a plot of land that now I was responsible for, so I had to come over and lock up and make sure it was secure. And I then got a company in to drill a borehole, and that turned into a marathon. It was supposed to be a 1-week job, but whole host of problems. We had equipment here on site for, I think, nearly 8 weeks drilling the borehole, and it was a nightmare. I'm not going to go into the depths of it here because we ended up in a legal battle later on. It's fair to say that it was all solved amicably, and we got a good water supply. It did hold our build up for about a year, and then he gave me a nervous breakdown in the process. But
that didn't put you off boreholes. Is it to do with that, or?
No, it was simply down to a whole load of errors, and there was no real blame here. There were, I think, some equipment breakdowns from the company, some changes of personnel, change of rig which worked in a different way. I think one worked in metric and one worked in imperial. And so there was some dimensional errors. We ended up with a borehole that was 20 meters shorter than it should have. All told, there was nothing there that was a deliberate failing. It was just a string of errors that ended up causing us a whole load of problems. It wouldn't put me off putting another borehole in. In fact, now I know how to do it. I've learned an awful lot about boreholes and water treatment. I could set up a little business as a consultancy on how to get your own water supply. And it is great because you don't have any water rates. So that's a big advantage. So anyway, we've got this plot of land now all leveled. And by this time, I looked around at how we were going to build the house, what we were going to build it out of. And I decided early on that really timber frame gave us the very best options in terms of being able to get a build up fairly quickly, because we were going to be building in the autumn and we wanted it weather tight fairly quickly. It gave us guaranteed air tightness. We found a builder who was prepared to offer a package of an insulated foundation system, frame, insulated house that was weather tight with guaranteed Passive House Institute standards of airtightness. Now, that's rare. Builders are struggling to get houses airtight. And this company was prepared to have 20% of the total payment dependent on passing an air test, which is staggeringly confident in building an airtight house. And it is not easy to get below the Passive House Institute standard of 0.6 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. By the way, we passed test first time at 0.43. So they live up to their promises without a shadow of a doubt. They came along. They were in Ireland, and that worried me because, they were in Tipperary. And I thought, well, God, this is going to be difficult. How do you deal with an Irish company? So we flew over to Dublin, my wife and I, and we spent a couple of days, and we drove down to Tipperary, and we had a look at some houses they built, got to know them, thought, actually, they're the best option. They were a very good price. Ireland had had a deeper recession than we've had, and their building industry crashed deeper than ours did. So they were very keen for work. I did all finance checks on them, and they came back okay. They were a company that had built a lot of houses a year, gone right down to building a very small number, but they'd hung on by their fingertips, and really down to one man, Joe, the owner of the company, who is one of the most hard-working grafters I've ever met, and he's just tough, and he managed to pull his company through it. I'm sure he made some tremendous sacrifices to do that. But having read that, I thought, well, this is the sort of guy I want. If he's survived that, he's probably going to be a good guy to trust. So we trusted him. The stage payment plan meant that we had very little exposure ourselves through the build. So they laid a passive foundation, which is 300 millimeters of insulation under the floor. There are no foundations in the ground on this house. It's sitting on a large lump of polystyrene sitting straight on the ground onto some packed chippings. And the house sits entirely on that. It's a reinforced concrete raft set into the polystyrene, and underfloor heating pipes are put into that. They're not primarily for heating. Those pipes are there to circulate water around the floor, so that if one part of the floor gets the sun on it, the water circulates around and moves the heat to another part of the house which doesn't get the sun. So the little pump just runs away at about 20 watts, moving heat around without heating the house up. They put the frame on there so that the insulation of the frame overhangs the insulation on the outside, so it's completely wrapped. It's a bit like having a quilt on your bed and not having the possibility of being able to poke your toe out the outside and get cold. You're wrapped all the way around with insulation. So it's 300 millimeters of polystyrene insulation under the floor, 300 millimeters of cellulose insulation pumped into the walls, 400 millimeters of cellulose insulation pumped into the warm roof, because the house is room in roof, so the 2 bedrooms and bathrooms in the roof upstairs.
And this was all on your specification and designs. It was quite easy to get from.
Yeah. It was essentially, I drew the plans, but I didn't draw any detail into the plans because I didn't know how to build a house. I mean, I didn't know where you put joists and rafters and things. I It's way beyond me. For planning, all you need is an outline drawing, and so I am familiar with AutoCAD as a CAD package, and I've used CAD at work for 20 odd years, and that was a real gift. So by luck, this timber frame company also used AutoCAD. So I sent them my AutoCAD drawings. They adjusted them slightly to fit their system and sent me back the detailed drawings that showed, where all the joists and the timbers were, and things changed by a few millimeters here and there just to, fit in with their 400 mil spacing system they use. And in fact, I got those drawings back, and they were the drawings I used for building regs approval because they showed the structure of the house and how it was built. Worked extremely easily. I literally emailed them a set of drawings, of AutoCAD drawings, and they emailed me back a week or so later a set of plans for approval. I accepted them. We haggled a bit over the price, and the price was a complete package of them coming over and putting the foundations down, bringing the frame over, pre-assembled from Ireland, from Tipperary. It comes over in large panels that are all prefabricated there in their factory. It's very accurately built. The tolerances are within a few millimeters, which saves you a lot of money in wastage, we found.
You mentioned haggling on the price there. On what basis? How are you working that? How do you know the costs, or are you just saying, is there anything you can do for me?
The haggling on price was that we put together a contract. In fact, I wrote the contract because they didn't really deal with contracts. They would just do things verbally. And a lot of the building industry works with just verbal things. And actually, I wanted a contract. I wanted to know who was responsible for one bit and who. I didn't want there to be any arguments down the line. So I drew up a contract which, another customer of theirs had started with, actually, that I knew, and modified it for this. And I included the drawings and the full details of what was and wasn't included. And they priced on that. And there were some things they'd added in which we didn't really want. And so we knocked those out. And we literally sat in the car outside the site, the manager of the company from Ireland and myself, with the red pen going through the contract, and eventually came to an agreed figure. And it wasn't terrifically expensive. I mean, the foundations, the airtight, weathertight house frame, not plasterboard or anything inside, but just the frame covered in membrane so that we keep the water out. With the foundations was about 65,000, including the garage, which is almost a double garage. So not massively expensive when you think that includes all the insulation as well.
As the project manager, what were you doing during this time to know that at the end of this, you're taking over or someone else?
No, I was taking over really from that stage on. So I was coordinating with people like window suppliers to make sure that the windows arrived in the right time frame, because the windows have to come in quickly so they can do the air test. So I sorted that out. Luckily, the frame company liaised with the window manufacturer because they were an Irish company down in Cork, so not too far from Tipperary. So it was nice and easy for the holes in the frame and the size of the windows to be joined together by the timber frame company and the window company talking to each other, which helped a great deal, because the window company were not the best communicators in the world. That bit, once that was done, I then got a roofing company in to put the roofing on. They're recycled plastic that looks like dark slate. They're made from old car tyres and bin bags, recycled, and they're recyclable. And they met the conservation officer's approval. Most of the roof on the south side is covered in solar panels that are set into the roof, so there's no roof covering underneath them. So I got the company in to do that. They'd never done that before. Very common in France. Very good, because it means that you end up with panels that are almost flush with your slates. And we chose black panels so they can't be seen. That was our only slight hitch, really. The conservation officer wasn't happy with putting solar panels on. He wanted it all slated. And
do you think there'll be a big change? I know Tesla are still playing around a little bit, but they have created these panels that do just look like slate. I don't know how they've done it and how expensive they are.
Yeah, I mean, they're not the first to do that. It has to be said that Solar Century did it about 10 years ago with the E21 slates. And yes, the problem with them is interconnectivity. How do you, when you're putting these slates up, you have to wire them together at the same time. So you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of wiring joints all over the roof. But the way Tesla are doing it is in large prefabricated panels, which gets around that issue. And I think it's probably a good way forward. Having said that, we're quite happy with our integrated system. We've got 25 panels set into the roof. They're just fitted onto plastic flashing trays that are screwed directly to the roofing battens, the same as slates would go down, and the slates just go around to the flashing. So we saved about 45 square metres or something of slate on one side of the roof, that's a couple of £1,000 saving. So made the solar panels that much cheaper.
And that is dealing with your hot water as well as electricity.
It's purely an electricity. They're just PV panels, but we do use that to generate hot water. We use a new system that's come out, a very innovative system that uses a phase change material to store heat as a heat battery, a thing called a SunAmp PV. And it uses the same material that are used in hand warmers, stuff called sodium acetate, that when you heat it up, it turns into a liquid. And then when you trigger it to turn back into a solid crystal, it gives off a lot of heat. So you can store large volumes of heat as a small volume of liquid, which then does this clever trick of turning into a solid and giving off loads of heat. So we've got a little tiny box upstairs that is about the size of a combi boiler and stores 5 kilowatt hours of heat, which it gives off on demand, just like a combi boiler. And that's charged up purely by the electricity from the solar panels. Whenever there's any spare generation, it is diverted into a little 3 kilowatt heater in there that just recharges that little pack up. And it's tiny. It takes up so much less space than a hot water cylinder, and yet has all that heat capacity. It will actually just fit inside a 600 millimeter kitchen base unit. So people have actually fitted them inside,
And I remember you showed me an air source heat pump as well when we wandered around. So surely you have already dealt with all your needs, or what? No, there's something else going on here.
The air source heat pump's a bit of a overkill, really. I bought it on eBay, cheap, and we don't really need it. It was nice to have. I thought the house would need heating. In fact, it doesn't need heating. And so, but all that's really used for is it preheats a little water buffer tank, which preheats the cold water coming in, which means that our water that we've got running through our instant water heater that's heated up from the solar doesn't need to do so much work, so we can have a lot more hot water. It can put heat into the floor if we need it. It can run the underfloor heating. It's got a diverter that can warm the floor up if we need to. But in practice, we don't need to. I mean, the thing we underestimated with this house was the heating. All the calculations I did said it only needed a few hundred watts of heat maximum in very, very cold weather. And I couldn't believe them, so I sort of ignored them and put lots of heating capacity in, which it didn't need. I didn't pay enough attention to how much solar gain you get and how you control that. And I've had to put measures in to control it. We've got films applied to the outside of the glazing on the south side to reflect heat to stop the solar gain, because we're running the cooling systems to cool the house down for 6 or 7 months of the year, which was silly.
So that's interesting. We mentioned earlier how you don't have an architect. Do you think if you had managed to have that passive house architect, even remotely, that you could have cut yourself out of these challenges?
I'm not sure. I think with a good enough architect, I know one architect who does understand this, and I've had 13 architects visit this build, and only one of the 13 architects that visited this build had the concept of overheating in their heads, because they're not engineers, they're not technicians, they're not scientists. They do not understand generally quite what a problem solar gain is. And I'd put some shading on to try and reduce it. That wasn't enough. I should have done far more. And we haven't got lots of glazing. I mean, some of the architects I went to initially and got some drafts from, they showed loads of glazing to give you light, airy homes because that's what everybody wants. But of course, the glass lets in an enormous amount of heat. And it's also lousy as an insulator. I mean, even the very best triple glazing is still 4 or 5 times worse than the walls. We've got really, really good triple glazing here. It's 50 mil thick, 3 layers of glass, argon filled, 2 reflective layers.
And was the house modelled in PHPP? Did you?
Yes, it was. I did model it in PHPP, and I built a simpler heat loss model myself to do the sort of what ifs. PHPP is very, very complicated, and it's great for giving you a final result, but it's not very good for doing what if I change the windows from this type of window to that type of window? To do that in PHPP takes an awful lot of time and effort. So I built a spreadsheet that just says what happens if I change that. And it gave me a number, and it turned out that my spreadsheet result is within about 10% of PHPP, and other people have used it and said the same thing. So you don't need these complex models to get within the ballpark of being right. Our biggest disturbance factor here is that we're in a sheltered valley, and we have a microclimate which is about 2 to 3 degrees warmer than the average for this area. So when I put all the climate data into PHPP and to my own spreadsheet to predict my heat losses, it over predicted the heat loss. It said I would need about 1 kilowatt of heating in the middle of winter. In fact, we probably need about 300 or 400 watts in the middle of winter. And conversely, in summer, it didn't predict the overheating risk. It said we had, low overheating risk, when in fact, because we're in this sheltered valley with very low local wind speeds and a lot of shelter, and it's a little sun trap really, we do have far more overheating than PHPP predicted. I had first sight of that when the groundworks team were in. They built a big retaining wall around the back, and the retaining wall is on the east and north sides of the depression in the ground. And they were getting temperatures in July of over 40 degrees. When they were laying blocks, they were not happy bunnies. They were drinking gallons of water. And that gave us an idea that we had created a sun trap. So that's a bit untypical. I'm not sure that an architect would have picked that up. I think one of the really experienced passive house people probably would have done, and probably would have been able to see the problem if they'd been to the site enough times to understand the reality here rather than just looking at a plan. And again, that's difficult if you're dealing with a remote architect. How many times is the architect actually going to come down to the site? And are they going to pick that up?
What else have we not talked about? I'm not sure we even completed that last bit of the house. We talked about the tiles going on and the solar panels going up, but there's a lot of fixing out internally and other jobs.
That's the really slow bit, really, because all the internal stuff I've done myself. I did get a joiner in to hang the doors because they're very heavy, but I've laid all the flooring and done most of the decorating and curtains and fittings and cupboards, and I did all the plumbing and heating system. I had to get an electrician in to do the basic wiring because I don't have a Part P certificate, but we worked together, so I worked as the electrician's labourer effectively to get that right. So yeah, it's really slowed down because it's just been one man working on his own 90% of the time, and you don't realise how long jobs take when you're doing things on your own. Putting ventilation ducting in, for example, it didn't take very long, but on your own, it means running from one end of the house to the other 20 times an hour as you pull a foot through and then go the other end and push a bit through and then pull a bit through. With two of you, it would have been half an hour rather than 3 hours. And it's that sort of scale of problem.
Would you have changed that? Because how many years are we up to now?
3 years. The build started in October 2013.
And 4 before that, looking for the land.
And 4 before that, looking for the land and things, yeah. And we've had a year of delay over the water supply. So in reality, October 2013 to the end of 30th of September 2016, we got the completion certificate. That would have been a year earlier had we not had a year of battling to get potable water out of the borehole. That was, I think it was an 11-month delay. Nobody's fault, really. I mean, the borehole company did give me some compensation. They were very good to deal with. They admitted they'd made some errors and what happened. I did an awful lot of work without realising the borehole company had made an error. So I spent 6 months trying to fix problems and make the water supply work without realising the borehole wasn't correct. So there was a lot of hassle there, a lot of stress. I think one thing I'd like to say is never underestimate the emotional strain that self-build will put on you, even if you're the most sane, calm, pragmatic person. You will suffer some severe stress. And for me, I'm happy. Well, not happy, but I will say I came extremely close to having what I think would be called a mental breakdown.
You don't resent the building, though, or anything like that?
No, I don't. But you just need to be aware that, and I'm not alone, and the self-build forums are fantastic support groups for self-builders, not just because of the exchange of ideas and information and learning from experience, but I think one of the biggest benefits I found of being on internet forums of self-builders was you're not alone when you come close to having a nervous breakdown. You realise that actually practically every self-builder comes to that stage in the build where it all just gets too much.
It's a big project. We know that. And are there any other key tips that you give someone coming into this?
Do your research. I think the most important thing you can do is research, and more research. Don't trust anybody until you've double-checked everything 3 times yourself. There's so many people saying so many things. You just have to work through until you understand it, and so that you're clear that what you're getting is actually applicable to what you want to do and is the truth from the perspective of what you're doing. Somebody else's advice on the type of windows or the type of heating system or the type of water systems put in might be absolutely right for what they're doing, but it might be absolutely wrong for what you're doing. And so there's no substitute for you gaining the knowledge and just putting the graft in and doing it. None of this stuff is rocket science. You don't require degrees in anything to understand it. If you require degrees and whatever, then the building industry wouldn't be populated by the sort of people it is. You do have to understand how it all works, though. And, once you understand that, you know that you're buying the right stuff and not the wrong stuff. I made lots of mistakes and bought things which I've later sold on eBay. I bought a thermal store for hot water, and then we found it overheated the bedroom to such a degree with the heat loss from it. From 210 litres of hot water was just overheating that bedroom. Cracked an oak door, got that hot. We sold it to a couple in Yorkshire on eBay. It's going to an old stone cottage. I'm sure it'll do their job perfectly. But that was an example of me not doing enough research on heat losses, because the heat losses stipulated on thermal stores and hot water cylinders don't assume that they will contain hot water all day. Sounds daft, but that's the British or the European cycle test. Assumes that the tank is actually cold for much of the time and it's only heated for short periods during the day when it's used. And that's not the case for most people now. They heat up their hot water with solar panels and whatever. The thing will be hot for long periods of time. So you have to really, just grip research and ask questions if you don't understand it. And that's where the forums are great, actually. The self-build forums are fantastic for that. Except you might get 6 answers to one question. There might be 6 different answers. So
always the way you have to make the final decision. When are you moving in, and how do you feel about that?
We're moving in as soon as we've got our existing house sold and we've got our VAT back. We're currently waiting for the VAT man to process our VAT reclaim. We're owed about just over £10,000 of VAT, and we ran out of money. To be completely fair, a year ago we ran out of money, and so that slowed things down. It's, I've been doing things on the house when I've had a bit of spare cash from my pension. Not what we originally planned. If we originally got the money back, we'd have sold our old house, recovered all our savings, and be well away. I should have the VAT money back before Christmas. That's going to be used really to tart up the house we're selling, which I've already started on doing, but this drive wants resurfacing to make it, the impact as you come in is one of the big things when you're selling a house. And as soon as that's done, that's going on the market, and then we can move in. We have to be a bit cautious about selling and moving because we own 2 houses at the moment. This house doesn't attract capital gains. Well, it would attract capital gains tax if we were to sell it. If we move in here and leave our old house empty, there is a technical problem in that if we then sell that, it's a second home and we could possibly find ourselves in a difficult tax position. So it's better to stay legally living in your old house until you've got it on the market and sold, and then you can come under the normal rules of selling your house and moving into one you've built. So that's what we're planning to do.
Jeremy, I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much for doing this and all the wisdom that you've shared. Thank you.
It's been nice to talk to you, and I hope that people can, approach self-build with a little more enthusiasm and knowledge.
Head online to take a look at the show notes for this one at houseplanninghelp.com/155. You can review the key points, take a look at the photos throughout construction. And I've got a question for you as well. Would you follow Jeremy's lead and design your house by yourself? Let me know. Answer in the show notes. Just scroll down to the bottom and you'll see where you can do that. houseplanninghelp.com/155. My call to action today is to get on the VIP early bird list for the Hub, because enrolment's currently closed and won't be opening for the next few months until we're well into 2017. So lots of benefits of joining the Hub, the video case studies. Clearly, I run a production company, so I've been very keen to utilize video wherever possible. And we've got these in-depth case studies. Long Barrow was the first one in Cirencester, and now we're at Buckinghamshire Passive House. You've got the progress calls, the modules, our private forum as well. Find out more, houseplanninghelp.com/join, where you can get yourself on the waiting list. Next time, Lisa Kerslake from Swift Ecology is my guest. We're leaving the house behind and venturing out into the garden. We've never done this before, have we? So what will make a thriving habitat for insects and wildlife? We'll discuss that next time. Thanks for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.